This video is brought to you by patreon.com/worsttake. Get access to exclusive live streams and Discord servers, on-screen shoutouts, and early access to some videos when you join now. Help make sure that we can continue to make content like this by supporting the Patreon. Links are in the description down below. What a week, man. What a week the Cleveland Browns have had. What a week the NFL has had. Free agency is always a good time, always a fun time. It's where you get to see people be optimistic about things that they very likely won't be optimistic about in like October. You know, like shout out to Russell Wilson. But it's just a fun time of the year to be a football fan because there's all of these possibilities, all of these combinations that you get to see players that you're used to seeing in one jersey play in another jersey. And I don't know what it is about that, but there is something to seeing some guy play well in one jersey and then watching him play in a different jersey that's just special, right? And that's what free agency brings. A lot of opportunity for that. Like the first time we see Derrick Henry in a Baltimore Ravens jersey, going to be kind of surreal. But let's talk about the Browns free agency. Let's talk about the questions that you guys had about the Browns free agency. And we're going to start from a question from your average Browns fan who says, if you had to pick one running back, would you draft between Trey Benson, Blake Corum, and Jonathan Brooks? Trey Benson. Not even close. I'm not a big Blake Corum guy. I think there are two like parties between like Ohio State fans who also are Browns fans. There are the Ohio State fans that are prone to kind of overrate Blake Corum because he has destroyed Ohio State every time that they've played him. And then there are the Ohio State fans who hate him because he's from Michigan. I have said this before. I'm not really the biggest Ohio State fan in the world. I've seen Blake Corum. I think he's an average back, to be honest with you. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but I really think Trey Benson has the potential to be an above average back. Everybody else is kind of just, meh. The next question comes from Pattinson Future, who says, so on paper, the Browns still have one of the best rosters in the NFL. How do you feel like we compare to other teams while they are also attempting to improve the roster? I'd look at teams like the Texans as significant threats to overtake us as the ones to take out Kansas City. Well, I think Kansas City's in a class of their own because they're two-time back-to-back champions working on their three-peat, and Pat Mahomes is a three-time champion. Correct me if I'm wrong. So, they're kind of in a class of their own in the NFL. But I always, and this is just something that I've learned throughout doing this for the last 5 years, going on 6, wow, is you have to be careful with your takeaways after free agency. Because it's real easy to overrate a team because they made a bunch of moves in free agency. Like Houston. We're going to talk about who Houston added, right? They added some pieces. Sure. We're not going to talk much about what Houston lost. They lost starting a linebacker. They lost Sheldon Rankins. They lost some pieces. So did they get better or did they just reshuffle the deck? When I look at Houston's free agency, I see a team that shuffled more than stacked. Also remember that the 49ers weren't big players in free agency last year. The Chiefs weren't big players in free agency last year. Those are the two teams that played in. Also, another thing that gets forgotten about is the importance of continuity. While it's exciting that a team can add a bunch of names to a roster. We've seen this in Cleveland. That's fun in March, right? When we're just talking about it hypothetically on paper. But what happens when you get to June, July, August, September? We start talking about how these pieces need time to gel, how they need to get time to learn each other, right? Like we always end up in that trap. We trade for Deshaun Watson. Deshaun Watson gets here. He needs time to gel. And that's true. These new pieces that you add when you do these big splashes, they're not going to come out day one ready to go. They need time to gel. So when you do something like you sign a bunch of free agents and that gets everybody excited, we forget about that process. And then we slight the teams that don't make a bunch of big kind of earth-shattering moves when those teams have continuity on their side. Like the Kansas City Chiefs are dangerous. They just added a wide receiver. They still have Travis Kelce and Pat Mahomes. And they're returning basically that entire defense. Maybe they lose L'Jarius Sneed. Maybe they keep him on the tag. But they're going to be a dangerous team. So I try to not get too carried away with who's catching up with who roster-wise immediately after the free agents period. What I do know is if you looked at this roster for the Cleveland Browns, and if you think they have a franchise quarterback, they should be a very good team, right? And you don't have to feel this way about Deshaun Watson for me to prove this point. Literally insert any other franchise quarterback in your mind. Tell yourself that they have this roster and ask yourself, do you think that team's a championship contender? Deshaun Watson, Kevin Stefanski, they all have enough that if they are healthy, they should be able to compete. That is the mark of a good roster. Whether it's the best roster in the NFL, who knows, who cares? The best roster in the NFL rarely wins the Super Bowl now. It's the team that can win that tournament at the end of the year. And sometimes it's not 1-to-1. A lot of times that's not 1-to-1 with who has the best roster. Austin says, what impact, if any, did the Jerry Jeudy trade make the free agency signing? And the free agency signings have on the Browns draft board? More likely to draft not draft certain positions. What do you think about 54? I don't think the Browns are a team that really changes much because of free agency as far as their approach to the draft. I think the Browns' approach to the draft is that they have a guideline of players that they like, right? They have guardrails. They like a certain type of player, and they try to draft those kind of players. The Browns have drafted a right tackle when they didn't need a right tackle in DeJuan Jones, and it worked out. They drafted Martin Emerson when they didn't need another corner because they like him, and it worked out, right? JOK when people didn't think they needed a linebacker in 2021, and it worked out. Grant Delpin when people didn't think they needed. Let me stop myself right there. People did think the Browns needed a safety in the 2020 draft. But still, right? They draft Grant Delpin. The Browns are going to draft players that they think can contribute. Where they fit on the roster, they'll figure that out later. But they want to draft good players before they worry about where those players fit. And I think that's the right way to go about it. Because the way we traditionally look at the draft, I feel like is backwards. We're worried about where a player is going to fit before we know if that player is going to be good. And I can understand you can say, hey, a player's not going to be good if he doesn't fit what you're doing. And that's not what I'm saying. So let me rephrase it. You have to know a player is good before you can create a plan for that player to play, right? We look at the draft and we ask ourselves, well, if they take this player, does this player have a path to being on the field? But the path to being on the field doesn't matter if the player isn't good, right? Siaki Ika had a path to playing on the field this year, and it doesn't look like they feel like he's good enough to take that role. So it doesn't matter that he has a path, right? In order for a drafted player to fill a need, they have to be good. So you want to draft somebody who's good before you just go to need. And if you think that player is good and they fill a need, great. But you got to know if the player's actually good, right? Like, I think that's the most important thing. And I think that's how Andrew Berry likes to go about it. Thank you for the question. The next question comes from Dex, who says, what does Deshaun Watson's season need to look like next year in order for us to consider the trade a success? I mean, there are some people who will not deem the trade a success outside of a Super Bowl. For me and anybody who is trying to be somewhat reasonable about this, what Deshaun Watson needs to do this year in order for the trade to look like a success is that the Browns need to look like a serious Super Bowl contender with him. That could mean maybe you lose in double overtime to the Chiefs in the second round, or you lose in a conference championship game, or you win in the conference championship game, get to the Super Bowl, lose, or you win it all. But that's what you need. The Browns need to feel like serious Super Bowl contenders. If that is the case, nobody's going to care about that trade. The Browns made that trade because with Baker Mayfield, they felt, and it still has not been proven to be wrong, that they could not be serious Super Bowl contenders. And correct me if I'm wrong, has Baker Mayfield been the quarterback of a serious Super Bowl contender since he's left Cleveland? Baker Mayfield just didn't hit that for them. They didn't think he could be that. They felt like Deshaun Watson could. Statistically, I could care less what it looks like. However it happens, it happens. And I'm not going to sit here and put the barometer at 5,000 yards or whatever that people are putting it at. But that's what you need to feel. You need to feel this team be a Super Bowl contender in order for people to feel like this trade was worthwhile. It could be a Cam Newton 1 year run, you get to the Super Bowl. But if you are a serious Super Bowl contender for the first time in the franchise's history since coming back in 1999, then the trade, it just doesn't matter that much. If you are a fun playoff team next year, okay, people ain't going to like that. Right? If you get bounced in the first round, people ain't going to like that. If you lose to the Chiefs in a way that deems that you weren't a serious contender to begin with, like that's what you, rain, shine, win or loss, you need to feel like the Browns were this close to winning a championship at the very least, right? Like, hey, if it just bounces our way, we could have beat them and we could have won it all. We've never felt that way about the Cleveland Browns since they came back in 1990. That's what Deshaun Watson is here to do. So in order for Deshaun Watson's season to look like a success, in order for the trade to look like a success, we need to get there. Now, to be fair to not Deshaun Watson, but to the critics of Deshaun Watson, it's not like he's ever been the quarterback of a team that you thought was a serious Super Bowl contender too. So he has to prove himself as well as the Browns had to prove themselves. Right. But that's what Deshaun Watson is here for. You had great rosters around Baker Mayfield. Furthest you got was a loss to the Kansas City Chiefs that was close, but in a game where Pat Mahomes didn't play the entire fourth quarter. You had multiple possessions to try to take the lead, despite the fact that Rashard Higgins fumbled that ball going into the halftime. You still had multiple times take the lead, couldn't do it, and you lost to Chad Henne in the fourth quarter. That's as far as you got with Baker Mayfield. If that's as far as you can get with Deshaun Watson, the trade is not a success. If you get further than that with Deshaun Watson, the trade is a success. That's what it will take. You can get there multiple ways. You can get there by going to the AFC Championship, winning the AFC Championship game, winning the Super Bowl. You could get there in the same round. You could lose in the same spot, but it can be very different, right? Because if the Chiefs and the Browns go blow to blow and the Chiefs win because of a field goal or something silly like that, we're going to feel different about that. It's about how you feel about where the team is at. Remember how we felt after the Baltimore game? We felt like this team really had a chance to win it all. You need to feel that multiple points of next season. That's what they need to have that feeling. You need to really feel like in December, in January, and hopefully in February, that this Browns team can win a championship. If you feel like that, the trade's a success. Not something crazy can happen and they might be able to win a championship off a fluke. Like last year where we were like, hey, maybe we could do it with like the same way that somebody won a championship with Nick Foles or the Broncos did, right? Like, no. Can't feel like you could win it off a fluke. It has to feel like we might just be good enough to do this. That's what you got to feel like, right? If you get there, that's one thing. If you win the Super Bowl, obviously that's one thing, but you need to feel like that. And there are teams that feel like that get eliminated in the second round. There are teams that feel like that get eliminated in the AFC Championship game. There are teams that feel like that get eliminated in the Super Bowl, but you need to feel like that. That's my answer. I hope that makes sense. Adam says, not even a question. Just want to laugh about the Kenny Pickett trade. They're going all in on Russ. I mean, look, when they signed Russell Wilson, he did a video package talk about hey, Pittsburgh, I'm here. So this was not a mystery that it wasn't going to be a real competition at the quarterback position. Now, they got rid of Kenny Pickett because he probably did a little bit of that Baker Mayfield. Remember when the Browns traded for Deshaun Watson? Baker Mayfield threw a little bit of a temper tantrum. Same deal, right? Same deal happened with Kenny Pickett. It's funny to see the Pittsburgh Steelers speed run the Baker Mayfield experience. It truly is something. But yeah, it's interesting. Look, I know a lot of people's take was, hey, they could just get off of Russ at any time. Pittsburgh can. It's only $1.2 million and they can move. Nah, they stuck with them for a year. They committed to Russ. And look, man, teams are paying right now over $100 million to have Russ not play for him. Not play for their team. That's a sign of somebody you might not want to have in your locker room. The Turner family says, do you think Mike Vrabel is that signing that's going to push the offense into another level with him being a new consultant? I think Mike Vrabel, if he consults on anything, it's going to be more about these coaches transitioning from college to pro more than anything. And also on the defensive side, I don't really see him helping out on the offense unless he's asked to kind of simulate a troubleshoot. Like if the Browns want to do something where they run a drill, like this is just purely hypothetical, by the way. Like let's say the Browns or Jim Schwartz wants to get this offense ready, right? So Kevin Stefanski wants to get this offense ready and stress test. One of the ways you could do that is bring in Mike Vrabel for a day and let him call plays on defense. So it's a little bit of a different philosophy than what they're used to with Jim Schwartz and kind of just stress test the defense like that. Like there's multiple different ways he can help out on offense, but I don't think he's going to be drawing up plays or part of the day-to-day collaboration process. But if they want to do something gimmicky, like, have him come in at camp and run a set of plays, to stress test the offense or something like that, I could see them doing that. But next question, Ralph Miller, what do you think about the other free agent moves in the AFC North? Do you think we did enough to win the division? I think the Browns roster is good enough to have hopes to win the division regardless of what anybody else did in free agency. I don't think anybody in the AFC North has a better roster than Cleveland Browns. It's about whether the Browns can live up to the potential of their roster. And last year indicates that they might be able to do that. Jeffrey Miller says, what is the biggest remaining need on the Browns roster? Honestly, the biggest remaining need on the Browns roster is the availability of Deshaun Watson. That's going to determine the season more than like another tackle would or anything like that. If Deshaun Watson's available and healthy and plays well, this team can go very far. If he's not, they will be a fun team, but they won't be a serious contender. And I think that's going to make all the difference in the world. Look, there's a big floor for this team. I think their floor is like 9-10 wins. But I think the ceiling for this team could be a real Super Bowl contender. And I don't know if that's going to reflect in the win-loss record, but we'll definitely know what that feels like if that's the case by the time we get to January. Right, Jeffrey, and then Ian says, hey Q, I feel like the Browns community has been toxic as ever. I understand it's just the offseason woes, but what do you know about other fan bases? This argumentative, or is it just I just think this is where sports talk is. I think people here's my big theory on why sports talk is the way that it is right now. I think we as people are too used to not actually talking to other people. Now, this doesn't mean that you don't talk to other human beings. This doesn't mean that you don't talk to or interact with anybody. I'm not going out to tell you to touch grass. But what I am saying is that with the internet and the way that we use the internet, it's a lot more isolated. We kind of just talk to whoever is in our circle, and nobody really outside of that, right? We don't really have a reason to talk to strangers. Here's a good example of what I mean. Something just small, just a small interaction that we've completely phased out of our life. Delivery. When you get food delivered, it's no longer an interaction where you say hi to the delivery person, you get your food, maybe you say something about the weather, have some brief small talk, and hand them some money, give them the tip. It's just all an interaction on the app, and 30 minutes later, there's food on your welcome mat. Right? That whole human interaction part of it. Or you don't even have to call the restaurant and interact with the person answering the phone in order to call and get your order placed, right? Like it's just all digital. And while that is a lot more convenient and a lot of people prefer it, what we are cutting down on is just our interaction with strangers. We just don't interact with strangers as much. Like I saw a story about how people are scared to answer the door if somebody knocks on it and they're not expecting somebody, or how people don't really answer the phone just to answer the phone. Like it has to be somebody that they know and are expecting to call in order for people to answer the phone. And just think about all the little ways like that. The technology has made it so that we don't have to really interact with anybody we don't really know like that. Like how many of us know our neighbors? I don't know my neighbors that well. We don't interact with strangers as much. And when we don't interact with strangers as much, we tend to make those people who aren't in our group of whatever we're thinking not human, and we talk to them in ways that we would never talk to an actual human being. And I say all of this to say, we are assholes on the internet now because we don't talk to strangers enough, right? We're just not used to talking to strangers, or we've gotten out of practice to talking with strangers. And I'm not saying have a whole damn conversation with the stranger or something like that. But if you're wondering why we lack a decorum of respect, or, just a basic ability to kind of listen to people, I feel like it's because we've cut out all of those small interactions out of our lives. Like we just don't interact with strangers or other people like that. We kind of just treat everybody like we're robots unless we know the person that we're talking to, unless we're like friends or we have to work with these people. Like we just don't really know them. And I'm going to just steal a phrase that I see a lot on social media. When people feel like NPCs, so non-playable characters in video games, you start to treat them like that. And on Twitter, when these are strangers and they not your friends, people just start to treat people like that. And they make whatever argument you have archetype, not necessarily a representation of what you're saying. I can't tell you how many times people have gotten mad at me about a point on Twitter that I never made. They just imagine I made it, right? Because they see I'm a Browns fan and maybe I'm not saying something like horribly mean about Deshaun Watson, and they assume that I'm like one of these people who defends him and thinks he's innocent, and they like drop something in there and come back for somebody who thinks that. But, if you watch my channel, you know that that's not where I stand with that whole situation. But people don't really try to argue with you if they don't know you. And maybe even if they do know you, they don't try to argue with you. They try to argue with the ideal of the thing that they think you're standing for. Again, sometimes we got to ask ourselves, man, is all this streamlining good? like, did it kill us to talk to the delivery person? Did it kill us to like have a human interaction there? That like maybe I wonder, like, as future generations see how far we've gotten into this, that they start to cut back on it significantly, kind of like cigarettes, right? Where they're like, okay, we are interacting far too little, like we're too isolated, and maybe we need to start kind of interacting with strangers more often because we're just scared of each other. And if we're not scared of each other, we're mad at the ideal of whatever we assume that person is. Like we gotta talk to strangers more often, I guess, is it's my reasoning for this whole thing. But thank you guys for watching. Thank you guys for sticking around for that bit of Q's philosophy. I don't know how much sports talk oriented that was, but maybe somebody enjoys it. But y'all have a great day. Have a better night. Peace.